this is a talk that I've been giving in different variations. My role as Global Field CTO at GitLab, we have a lot of people, sort of director, VP, and above, that they're really struggling with how AI is going to impact them over the next 5 to 10 years. As you can imagine, I know a lot of you in the room, if you are doing anything around DevOps, the platforms that you're building, these are not things that we do for the next 6 months. These are things that we're building for the next 2, 3, 5 years and beyond. And source code management's in there, issue management's in there, and what I have to break down for executives is what we're starting to see with AI, it's no longer just about developers. So when we think about developer experience, we're now having to have a conversation around team experience. So what does this mean for my product management team? What does this mean for my testing team, my security team, my release management team? All of these people that have traditionally done work manually, AI agents and assistants are going to be there to augment the work that they do on a day in and day out basis. And we're going to start needing to rethink what that workflow looks like. One of my first talks at All Things Open, can't believe it's been 10 years now. I gave a talk about software delivery, and it was when I used to work at GitHub. And one of the jokes that I would talk about is everybody sort of knows the basic commands in Git. So I can do a clone, I know how to do a branch, I know how to change my branch, I know how to commit and add, and then I know how to push. Well, that workflow, when we start to think about how these agents know about things like different Git commands, I've been shocked that they know how to do things like how to do a proper rebase, how to do a proper cherry pick, how to undo certain commands. Those are the kinds of things that now you're not going to need to know about the commands. You're going to want to say, hey, I want to reset my environment to be X, and it's going to know exactly which commands to run in a specific order. And then how do we surround those workflows with other things that we need from a DevOps perspective? So right now there is this constant struggle that I see with teams. I remember I was a Microsoft certified trainer, and we used to do Microsoft SQL Server training, and there were 2 classes. You had one class for how to properly install and manage the Microsoft SQL Server instance, and then you had the development classes that sat above those that walked you through how to be able to properly structure your data, your tables, your relationships. We're seeing the same thing in the DevOps world. So you've got your IT ops teams are focused on how to run the platform. This is just day in and day out, care and feeding, setting up your SLAs, your SLOs, providing, we're seeing more and more of these platforms are now tier 0, tier 1 applications, follow the sun development, follow the sun support. We have a lot of customers that tell us 99.9% uptime is the base for GitLab in their organization. They want to see it higher. And then you've got the other side of this, which is your platform engineering teams. And these teams are coming in and having conversations about proper use of golden pathways and being able to bring in topics like FinOps and talking about developer productivity and looking at the data that's coming out of these platforms and figuring out how to tune and adjust the platforms to be able to make things more efficient across the platform. And in the center of this is the DevSecOps team. So you sort of get it from both sides. So unfortunately, those teams are sort of stuck in onboarding new development teams. They're getting the tickets for modifying issue templates, merge request templates, things like that. Well, what if I told you that there's a potential in the future that all of that goes away? Like, do we need one workflow? Do we need one set of best practices? And that's what this conversation is going to be about today. So at GitLab, this is what we call our eye chart. So when you look at a lot of the capabilities that where a lot of people who are starting down this platform journey, they sort of start in that middle. They start with SCM, they start with pipelines and continuous integration. And then what happens is they sort of shift to the right. And then as they shift to the right, they start to implement things like SAST, software composition analysis, DAST if you're building web applications. That then leads into automated testing platforms, integrating those. Then you go into things like feature flagging, release orchestration, and then that goes all the way into monitoring and observability. And this is the goal that most of our customers want to get to. They want to be able to have that one-stop shop that they know that any project that comes along, no matter what your target, that they can sort of a la carte menu, pick the things that they need for their given project, and they can use those in an autonomous manner that I can self-select and self-serve into the platform. So if I'm building an application that needs to deploy to the public cloud, I know which pieces from this a la carte menu I need to pick for me to be able to go ahead and build my application and deploy it into a hyperscaler. If I'm building an application, I got to deploy it to the mainframe, same thing. What are the capabilities that I need to choose here? And then what does the workflows look like for me to be able to do that? A lot of those things are, have a lot of conversations about this 80-20 rule that we need to have. So the 80% are the common infrastructure, common workflows, and then you have this 20% that we're firefighting, we're managing tickets, and they've got so many little one-offs that there's no way to really standardize on a single pipeline or a single route into production because they're dealing with so many different nuances. So the big challenge around this is when we think about AI-powered DevSecOps workflows is you can imagine if you had a system that had many different databases behind it, all of those different databases, you got to pull data out of it. And what we're seeing today is anybody here has done any work with API development in the last 10, 15, 20 years, one of the things that we are seeing is agentic AI is blowing up rate limits. We have a partnership with Anthropic. Anthropic's APIs are getting hammered all day, every day. And the amount of data that they send in and get returned back, especially when you think about streaming APIs, and as we open up more and more context windows, and then the tokens that we're able to return out of these LLMs, I mean, it is massive. So now you've got a balance between, do I need to run on-prem? How am I going to get charged? Because a lot of these tools are all going to charge you based on what are you calling, how much data are you transferring, things like that. And I'm going to show it to you in one of the tools today. So this is what we see with a lot of our customers. This is sort of like the standard workflow that you would go through. So you have an issue, user story, got your story points, all of your metadata around it. You then have a branch that gets created, dev commits to the branch, go ahead and push changes in, code review, feedback loop, security. You can see up here sort of how we move through this. Now, one of the things that I hear from a lot of, so Lee, what you're talking about here is we're gonna have an agent for each one of these boxes. No. You might have 50 agents for each one of these boxes. You're going to start to see swarm mentality of these agents, and they're all going to need to communicate with one another. This is the part that really hurts a lot of executives that I talk about. It hurts their head. Because now when we think about these APIs and we think about being able to make these calls, it is really hard for us to be able to think about if I've already built my platform and I need to make it a tier 0 application with 99.9% uptime, what if I told you in the next 12 months I'm going to have thousands of agents that are going to be hitting those APIs any time of the day? There will be no more availability for downtime because the agents are going to puke all over as soon as there's an outage. And you're not going to be able to go in and say, shut down all of the agents for an hour while I go do an upgrade. You're going to have to figure out how to do rolling updates. You're going to have to figure out how to make sure that everything is constantly up. You're also going to need to make sure that it's always up to date. How many people that are running their platforms have every piece of the stack is up to date right now today, using the latest version of every piece of software. Yeah. That's what I see with our customers. It's, oh, you know what? Yeah, we wanted to upgrade to the latest version of Jenkins, but there's this one pipeline that still needs the 4-year-old version because it can only use this version of Groovy, and I've got to use this particular plugin. Great. Well, what happens to those APIs? So now you're going to have different APIs for different calls that you're going to need to make. This is going to make it very challenging for people as we go down this path. This is the other piece that gets a lot of people. I have to teach our sales team at GitLab about this all the time, which is we have a tendency to sell as if a customer has one application. Like everybody's just building Airbnb. And when you go into the enterprise, you don't have one Airbnb. You've got Airbnb, you've then got commercial Airbnb, then you've got the Airbnb shoot-offs, you've got the financial services Airbnb, and then you've got the insurance Airbnb, and you've now got 10,000 projects that you're managing. And each one of those projects are at a different state of this chart, going from left to right. And as we think about these applications, they each have their own workflow. And as we think about the workflows for each one of these applications, if you've ever met a developer, they love being in charge of doing maintenance on a 5-year-old system. Love it. So when we start to think about these agents, what happens if an agent goes off and it modifies the code to something that the person who's coming in to review it was not even any of the original development team? Are they going to know how to review that code that's been written? What about the unit test? How many people here love the idea of an agentic or using an assistant to write your unit tests? How many people like that idea? Okay, all right. It's great because all of a sudden I get my code coverage number. It was at 62%. Now all of a sudden I'm at 85. I can go to production. How many of you write the unit tests after the code's been implemented with agentic AI? We all know that the reason we write unit tests is because it's supposed to be the requirement for the developer to go implement. So you should be using agentic AI to go write your unit tests first, and then you bring the human in to go ahead and implement the code afterwards. My workflow when I give demos of GitLab's AI solutions, I go in and I create an issue, and I have an issue template that talks about a BDD test, a unit test, and then the implementation. And then what I do is I write functional tests after the implementation's done. So as I go through that workflow and I show people how easy it is, man, I gotta tell you, I was actually very shocked the first time I went through how well it understands things like Gherkin. Like writing a Gherkin feature isn't something that, it takes a while to get used to it. But man, having an AI agent go off and write it, and all of a sudden you see it writes like 28 features, and you're like, yeah, this is exactly what I want. And then being able to pass that in as context to say, okay, now go write me the unit test to go solve those BDD tests. Awesome, now all of a sudden I've got 100 unit tests. Now I go to compile, and there's all kinds of agents that if you go out and start looking at different websites, like I'm going to talk a little bit later about model context protocol. And you start to look at things like ripgrep and how it can look at your Git diff. So you go ahead and you commit your tests. So now I've got a context of the change that I want to implement. Now I can go use that to be able to go off and now talk to my issue management system that now has all of the tests associated with it. I can now use this combination in my workflow to be able to make sure that I'm implementing the code in the right way. But now I might not want an agent to go implement the unit test. What I'm going to do is I'm going to ask the human to go write the implementation, but I will use an assistant to come along and help me along that path, but using the context of the tests that I'm bringing in. This is really powerful when we think about doing things for a lot of these legacy applications. So the other thing, I was just talking to somebody downstairs, one of the biggest issues that we're seeing is there's a lot of companies out there that are talking about, I can use agentic AI and I can take this application is in maintenance right now, And I can go ahead, I just give it a simple prompt and I can get it to break it up into microservices all at once. Yeah, great idea. I showed a customer, I said, let's go do this. We built a prompt, we went ahead, I built some memories, we went ahead and did it. And then I said, okay, now in my branch, I've got 18,000 files that have changed. So who wants to do that code review? So these are the things that we're running into on a day in and day out basis. So we've got a level set, because I've been using these terms sort of interchangeably. So the difference between an agent and an assistant. And there was a blog article, and it was somebody from IBM, and she did a great job describing these. So if you think about an assistant is going to go off and perform tasks that you've given them the requirements for. So go make me a reservation at an Italian restaurant Thursday night at 7 p.m. within this area, and only choose restaurants that are 4-star rated or higher, right? An assistant can take that as a prompt, they can go do it, they can go figure out which ones have availability and then go ahead and make a reservation for you. Relatively easy. When we think about what an agent does, think about a sports agent. A sports agent doesn't have requirements. A sports agent's goal is to make sure that the player is getting the most money for what value they provide. So that is what an agent is doing. An agent isn't sitting there and going, oh, you know what, we've got 2 weeks until the renewal of your contract. They're going ahead and they're monitoring your play all year, every year, no matter if you are in year 1 of your contract or year 5 of your contract. They are constantly talking to the executives at the sports team to be able to say, hey, have you seen how well my player's playing? You're going to have to fork over a little bit more money. Or, hey, it's time to renegotiate. And they know the parameters of what that player's going to want. They're constantly figuring out what that process is. So that's what we want to be able to do here. We want to think about, from a development perspective, what things can I just hand off and let an agent go do? And what are the things that I want an assistant who can augment the work that I'm doing, and I can sort of hand off those tasks. So let me go ahead and I'm going to jump into an example here. Now I need my glasses. So here I've got Visual Studio Code. Oh, it did not switch. Why did it not? Oh, I know why. There we go. Let me see if I can bump this up a little bit. Okay, so I've got a few tools on the left-hand side that are going to help me out with this. So the top one, because I work at GitLab, I at least have to show this or the product team will get very upset at me. So this is just GitLab workflow. So if you're using GitLab today, it allows you to be able to see issues that are open. You can see your pipeline statuses, things like that, just making regular API calls. This has nothing to do with agentic AI. The one up above is what we call Duo Chat. Duo Chat allows me to be able to interact. This is an assistant. So if I click on this, it's going to tell me, oh, you can ask questions about the code. So I can ask simple questions. Hey, what does this code do? And it will go through and it will look through all of the code, and it's going to go ahead and it's going to give me hopefully a nice little overview. You got to, let's see here, but you haven't provided any code for me. Well, there are code. Let's see here. What does OpenAI example.js do? Let's see if that will do it. Nope. Oh, there we go. So this is a really simple example of an assistant. I'm giving it a task, it's going to go respond, but it's not performing any actions. Now I promise that this is all things open, so there is an open source version, and there's a lot of them out there. So here's one that is called continue.dev. So we can ask the same question. Let's see, and what I'm using here is this drop down, because with Duo is going to call out and it's going to talk to the GitLab AI Gateway. The AI Gateway is going to pass a message through GitLab SaaS, and then it's going to talk to Anthropic, and then it's going to route it back. So with continue, you can run the models locally on your own machine. So I've got Ollama installed on my laptop, and I've installed some different models. Here you can see the different models that I've got. So I've got Granite code, I've got Mistral. So if I go ahead and I say, let's see if this one does any better. What does this code do? Or let's say project, maybe that's better. Oh, and that did not like. It is running. This just worked downstairs. Let me try a different model. Let's remain local. So as you can see, even running locally, and again, it all depends on the CPU that you've got locally, if you've got how much memory is on your machine. Obviously, all of those things make these things run a little bit faster. This is where like trying to build things for agentic AI get really hard, because like this is just a really simple prompt, really simple thing. This project has like 15 files in it, and you saw how long it took to be able to pass this information to a local model and get some answers back. It's actually giving a really good set of answers here. So when you're going ahead and you're working, there's going to be one of the things I remember last year. This was when Ollama had just come out. It was May of last year when it was like readily available, that they sort of said it was ready for production. And I had not heard of Ollama, and I was stuck on a plane flying from Singapore to London. And I was like, let me go ahead. So I installed Ollama, put in some, installed continue. I was amazed how much work I could get on the airplane. It was one of those things, it was a great assistant when I would get stuck, because most of the time what we would normally use when we're trying to do this work is we would go ahead and we would have something like Stack Overflow available to us. Well, on those long haul flights, I don't have that. I can't search GitHub, I can't search Stack Overflow, unless I'm gonna pay $129 to be able to get internet on that airplane. So being able to have this where it doesn't always necessarily give me the right answer, but it gets me unstuck enough that I can figure out, oh, this is what I need to go do next. Now, this is where the assistant, so you're noticing it didn't modify any files, and you've all seen things like code suggestion. So if you've played around with Copilot, other things, you can go into the code and it will start to make recommendations for you in the same way. Now, when we want to talk about an agent, now an agent goes off and it's not just going to go ahead and have access to be able to respond to me here. An agent is going to, let me make sure I'm in the right spot, yep. So this is an open source project. It's called Cline, C-L-I-N-E. And what Cline does is you can run it in sort of different modes. Now everybody knows every time you call a server-based LLM, so if you're calling OpenAI or if you're calling Anthropic, they're gonna charge you for it. And I think it's only fair that they should charge you for it. You're using their network, it's a call, Anthropic's gonna charge them, so it's only fair that they pass off the thing to you. So what I've got is I've got a really simple MCP server here that I'm building. So I can say, let's say let's start a new task. So I'm gonna talk about this in a second. Okay, so I want to manage multiple MCP calls together using LangChain. Okay, now you can see up in the top left-hand corner, I'm starting at $0, right? All I did was ask a question. Now you can see, oh, it looks like the user here wants to go ahead and manage multiple MCP calls using LangChain. So it's telling me LangChain hasn't been installed yet. You can see it's automatically going through, it's reading different files, it's understanding things. It's doing all of this on my behalf. So each one of these things is a different agent who has different tools associated with it. So when it's reading a file, there will be a read file tool. When it wants to write a file, there will be a write file tool. So now it's telling me, hey, by the way, I just looked at all the files, and it's telling me you're going to need to install LangChain if that's what you're going to want to use. So I'm going to go ahead and say, sure, let's go ahead and let's install LangChain. So now it's going through. You can see it's calling the API, and look on the right-hand side. It's automatically going ahead and modifying it, and it's going ahead, and now I've got a file that's being edited automatically by the agent. So as you start to think about, what does this mean? Like, is this code any good? I don't know. So one of the things that we joke about at GitLab is it's really kind of fun to take one model, so say it's Anthropic, or maybe it's a local model with Klein. I can drop down just like I did with Continue, and I can run local models. It's not nearly this fast. It takes a while for it to run each one of them. Here you can see it just went ahead and edited a file. So here's a LangChain MCP workflow example. Now it's going ahead and it's creating another new file. So it's not just going to edit one file. It will go ahead and think about all of the files that it might need. And when it'll get to a certain point, it'll say, okay, now that I've got all these, I'm going to just go write the test for you too. So it's going to make sure that it's got code coverage out of the gate. As you think about how these work is, I think it's kind of fun to say, like what we do at GitLab is, we have different agents that you can plug in throughout the workflow. So you can have a code review agent, you can have an issue summarization agent, you can have these different things throughout the workflow. Now imagine if I go ahead and I have Klein with Anthropic writing the code, but then I go ahead and use a different system prompt with a different agent that's using OpenAI to review the code. Or what if you did it vice versa? So this is what we're starting to see with a lot of our customers. They're like, you know what, we're not sure which one of these is gonna win. And we might use local models for some things. We will use remote models for other things. We're going to find a balance between budget and spend. And as you go down that path, you're going to start to learn how you can have agents and assistants work together and play off of them. If you want to have fun, if you want to go do a coding exercise, so what you can do is you go ahead and you have two agents argue over a code review. So you have one, just like this was a normal stand-up, right? Normal stand-up, go ahead and say, have one, and it's going to want to make changes, and have the other one say, no, I don't want you to change it that way, and then have it go ahead and change it anyway, and then go, no, 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 change it back. It's really funny to watch the two of them argue over who's right. So as this is going through and making a bunch of these changes, as your code bases get larger, it's really hard to be able to go through and keep the context window. The context windows are getting larger, but we don't want to pass in always the entire context. Imagine if you've got 10,000 files in your project. You're never going to be able to rip-grep through 10,000 files and pass in that entire repository as context. So what you're going to need to do, as you saw on the slide that I was about to show, is you're going to have to learn how to create memories. And what memories do is memories keep track of what is the current context and what are my changes that I'm trying to do. So as you go through, you're going to have little markdown files. And the thing that's really cool about a lot of these tools is they're starting to understand architecture. So inside this example, if this one will ever stop writing, I mean, all I want is, I just want a simple LangChain example. So you can see that one of the things that it's doing is it's actually creating a memory here. So in the README, it's now got a section about LangChain MCP integration examples. So a lot of these tools are starting to learn that, oh, by the way, my developers have really good history around stuff that's in the README. So it knows how to install things, it knows what the architecture, oh, this is a Docker-based project, oh, I found some Kubernetes files, so this is probably going to deploy to a Kubernetes environment somewhere, oh, I found a .aws config file, oh, this is probably going to deploy to AWS somewhere. So they're starting to learn about the architecture. Let me see if I can pull up this memory that I created earlier. So this is a mermaid graph, but what it did is it actually created a graph of this is how the model context protocol is going to work. This is just to talk to GitLab. So what I've done is model context protocol is sort of like an API gateway. And there's just a really good LinkedIn post that sort of shows what model context protocol really is. So if you have a laptop like a MacBook Air or MacBook Pro, and you usually have like one of those little dongles that goes on the left-hand side because you only have USB-C. Some of us still have USB-A that we need to plug in. Maybe I want to plug in a micro SD card. Maybe I need to plug in an HDMI onto that. So that little bridge is MCP. It's basically an API gateway. And then you've got different ways to be able to connect to that. And then all of your tools are going to sit on the other side. So there are a lot of tools that already exist. So I talked a little bit about something called ripgrep. Ripgrep is very powerful. It's a command that you can, or you can install the binary on your laptop, but at the same time, it will allow you to be able to do things that do it from a coding perspective. So anybody here has ever done search through VS Code or through IntelliJ, a lot of those tools all use ripgrep underneath the hood. And there's different SDKs for each different language. So there's a ripgrep implementation for TypeScript, for Java, for Rust. And then you have other ones where people are building APIs. So one of the other really popular MCP servers is for something like Slack. So, hey, by the way, I know that all of our builds, the logs always spit out, the streaming logs always go out to Slack. Okay, well, I could have an agent that's sitting there watching, and anytime I see an error, I can pull that in and then have that agent go, and maybe it creates an issue inside of GitLab for me and says we need to review and find out what that is. There could be another agent that's sitting there monitoring whenever a new issue gets created inside the project and can determine, oh, it's automatically added the metadata for a failed build. So because it's got a failed build, I can automatically assign a change of the GitLab CI file to one of my DevOps engineers. So those are the things we're starting to see, not only chaining of agents, but we're also seeing agents being able to talk to multiple tools. So this goes back to what I talked about in the beginning. If these agents are automatically doing a lot of this work for us behind the scenes and we're really reviewing and interacting with them, there's a pattern called human in the middle. So if that's what we're doing with these agents, do I still use the same workflow that I have today? Do I take an issue, put it into my backlog and beginning of my sprint? Do I take it out of the backlog, put it into my sprint board, go ahead, take those issues? Now a developer comes in, takes an issue, pulls it out, goes, creates a branch, does some work, pushes it into a PR or an MR, then goes ahead, does a code review, CI goes off and runs. What if I could define a different workflow for every different issue? What if I don't need that workflow? What if I don't need to create a branch? What if I'm just updating the README and I just want to push it straight to me? What if I go ahead and I make enough and the agents write enough code? What if there are 18 other issues in the backlog that new code automatically solves? Wouldn't I want to automatically close those issues too? And what about security vulnerabilities? You've got 10,000 projects, and across those 10,000 projects, you get an agent that very shrewdly figures out how not just to upgrade an NPM version, but finds out that, oh, by the way, we have a common issue of people, the way that they write their loops, that we have a memory leak in every single one of these loops. Well, what if I could have one agent go and talk to every project that has that vulnerability and just goes ahead and applies that fix automatically for me? So it's like Dependabot on steroids, right? So these are the things when I start to talk about that swarm mentality, you're going to have agents that are going to be running constantly inside your infrastructure, going off and doing a lot of this work for you. So now, what is the role of a project manager? Is the project manager just watching for anomalies in these agents? What about a product manager? What if I just could have a way for me to automatically run user acceptance testing? These are the kinds of things that I think we're going to start to see a shift. A lot of people that were implementing IDPs, anybody here implementing an IDP, an internal developer portal? We're seeing a lot of executives pause those initiatives because they're starting to say, I don't need this. I can get this same thing from an agent. The agent can go ahead and automatically connect me and extract all the data for me. I can use an abstraction layer of APIs and let the agents talk to the abstraction layer. So there's some really powerful things that are coming. Now, I don't want to scare anybody. Let me tell you, this is not something that we're going to see in the next 3 months, right? We're still going to need developers. I talk to students all the time. You don't have to worry about your job. I tell people, if the only thing you know about software development is syntax, you're done. If you know how to problem solve, you've got critical thinking skills, you understand how to put things together, when things should be put together, you understand best practices, you are going to have a job for a very long time because these agents are not perfect. Remember, they don't really understand the code. They understand the code, the letter, the token that came out, probability and statistics. It's just thinking what's the next thing. The other thing is we haven't figured out how to plug these into our internal package registries. So you know what they do? We got a lot of duplication of code floating out there. So we're going to need to figure out a way to be able to make sure that the internal best practices, that they know how to use those package registries to use those APIs and use that code that's already been written. And then, even better yet, what about the whole context of the NPM community or the Maven community? What about all of those jars and packages that exist out there? Those things we've got to figure out how to integrate those. That's where MCP is going to come in. That's where being able to stitch these together with LangGraph and LangFlow. I feel very fortunate back in early 2000s. I had a chance to work with some very bright people around semantic web and around OWL and Sparkle and the way that we build knowledge graphs and traverse knowledge graphs. That's all this is going to be. We're also going to think about workflows a little bit differently too. So I think that workflows, where we think about them as DAG, as directed acyclical graphs, we're going to create a new mathematical model that's going to be based on state. And you're going to have change states. And those change states are going to have little mini workflows inside each one of them rather than big, bulky CI pipelines, because we're going to have to do things differently incrementally. So with that, I want to thank you all so much for coming out. I hope you learned something today. I'll be around downstairs at the GitLab booth. If you want to stop, come by, just say hi. But thank you very much.